Elasticity. This is a short video explaining a bit more about the elasticity of demand and supply. Both consumers and producers have a degree of it, some more than others. Understanding this concept helps predict their behavior. Anticipation, or being able to gauge how people are going to play, is key to economics. Hi, I'm Mrs. Ross from TJ. I've been teaching a long time, 22 years plus. Let's see how long it takes for you to get elasticity. Here's the plan of attack. First of all, let's review. You got to know the basics, the demand and supply stuff. Next, we'll define elasticity and have a general description for both demand and supply. And then we'll diagnose the situation. How can you tell how elastic a situation is? Now, if any of this is questionable, go back to the other videos. Otherwise, let's get started. Okay, here's the review. It won't hurt a bit. First of all, demand and supply. What do you know? Hopefully, we'll start with the definition. What's the definition? Hopefully coming to mind are as follows. For demand is the willingness and ability to buy something. On the supply side, willingness and ability to sell something. Notice the similarities. Now, this is the part where you try to keep it simple. You're going to see that demand and supply are really the two sides of the same coin. Both involve willingness and the ability to. One's the buyer side, one's the seller side. There's a lot of other similarities too to help you keep things simple. When it comes to demand and supply, price is key. In demand, when prices go up, quantity demanded goes down, which means that the amount you are going to be buying might change with the price. There are also 6 shifters of demand. Hopefully you remember them. Income, number of consumers, substitutes, consumer expectations, complements, and consumer taste. Now, supply is also influenced highly by price, but in a different manner. Supply is profit motivated. When prices go up, quantity supply goes up. The more you're going to get paid, the more you're going to want to work. Also, supply is influenced completely by some shifters as well. 6 plus. That is technology, input costs, number of producers, government action times 2, labor productivity, and producer expectations. Both of these things at the bottom are the laws of and the shifters. Now, if you have any questions about these, you need to go back to those other videos. But if you're ready, let's get started on elasticity. Okay, what is it? Well, when I Googled it, this is what came up. The degree to which a demand or supply is sensitive to price change and income change. Now, we're going to be focusing mostly on price because that's huge. The income stuff, if you were more interested in this, which I know I took classes in college. But let's just keep this simple. Let's talk about price. And we're going to start with demand. Do you bounce or do you stick? Now, here's some questions I have to ask you, and this is how you can analyze your own elasticity. Like, for example, when you go shopping, do you buy the first thing you see or do you shop around? Do you walk when the price is too high or do you buy it no matter what? Do you buy generic, like the store brand when the name brand is too expensive, or do you go with the name brand? Now, the answers to these questions definitely will help diagnose how elastic your demand is. Now, while there may be a few other criteria out there, there are 3 main ones when it comes to demand and elasticity. The first one is necessities versus luxuries. Now, needs versus wants. Needs are things you have to use for survival. Wants are things you'd like to have, but you don't need. Also, we're going to be looking at percentage of your income. If it's something that is small price, small percentage of your income, it's going to be very insignificant. You're going to buy it no matter what. Large percentage of your income means that it's going to hit you hard. And so if there's a change in price, you might walk away. The last one is, are there any substitutes? If there's no other substitutes and you're buying it, this is the only choice you have. But if there are substitutes, you might switch over, and that's more elastic. Now, bringing these 3 together, we can diagnose the demand of any product out there, any service. So let me show you how to do that. Let me give you 3 main examples. Now, we can normally do a bunch more, but let's keep this simple. I'm going to show you how to do the diagnosis. Now, here are the 3 criteria we just talked about. And I'm going to bring up 3 different products: bikes, water, and Sprite. Now, I like to do each criteria on its own. So let's start with needs versus wants. Now, I know the bike thing might be a little iffy, but if a bike is really on your forefront, then it probably is a need. Water. We know that our bodies are mostly water, so it's a need. Sprite, definitely a want. We could live without Sprite. I have for years. Okay. Now let's go with the percentage of your income. Okay. Now with a bike, it tends to be pretty expensive. So it's a big percentage. Any change in price, you might find a different mode of transportation. Water tends to be either free or low cost. So it's a little percentage. You tend to buy it even though, you have other choices. Okay. When it comes to Sprite, again, a little percentage of your income, you tend to buy soda because it doesn't cost that much. Now let's talk about substitutes. Okay. Are there other substitutes for a bike? And the answer to that is yes. Okay. Which means you don't have to take a bike. There might be other modes of transportation. Water. Are there any substitutes for water? And the answer to that is no. Not really, at least. Okay. When you talk to any of the experts, we drink a lot of sodas, we drink a lot of other things, but water is what most people really need, and that most Americans are walking around dehydrated. So, water is definitely something that is hard to substitute for. Now, Sprite, of course, there's tons of, substitutes for that. So, now that we've diagnosed each by their criteria, let's go across horizontally and see if we can tell, is it elastic, which means you would bounce, or is it inelastic? Are you going to buy it no matter what? Now, when a bike is a need, which means it's inelastic, you're going to buy it no matter what, but it's a big percentage of your income, which means you might find something cheaper. So that's elastic. Are there substitutes? Yes. You don't have to stick with that. That's an elastic answer. 2 out of the 3 are elastic answers, so that means the bike is elastic. Okay. Water is a need. That means it's inelastic. It's a small percentage of your income. Again, inelastic. You'll buy it no matter what. And are there substitutes? Not really. So 2 out of the 3 are definitely inelastic. It could be 3 out of 3. So we're going to say that water is inelastic in demand. Now, Sprite. Need or want, it was a want. That means that your demand is elastic. You can bounce around to other things. You don't have to have it. It's a little percentage of your income, so you might buy it anyway. That means it's inelastic. Are there substitutes? Heck yeah. Aisles of them. So that means it's elastic. 2 out of 3. That means that Sprite is elastic. Okay. Now, hopefully they made some sense. And I wanted to show you a chart because this is economics. Now, when we've been drawing the demand curve up on the left down to the dirt, we pretty much have been just drawing it for proximity or how close it is to another curve. The actual pitch of the curve shows you whether it's elastic or not elastic. And so, like for D1, that's inelastic, which means that no matter what the price is, you're going to find very little change in the quantity. The people are still going to buy it. So, with a dollar increase, for the D1, you can see here that basically it's a decrease of only 8. And that's not much. D2 is elastic. So that means that with change in price, you should see a bigger change in quantity, and you do. When the price goes from 8, where we were buying 100, and it goes up to 9, a dollar increase, we actually scale back to 60. That's a huge difference too. Now, there are formulas of doing this, but we're going to keep this simple. But that's how you could look at a chart too. Now, let's go back and talk about the elasticity of supply. Okay. So again, we're going to think supply side. Now, do you move or do you wait? Are the 2 questions I normally ask myself. When you're producing SUVs and electric cars become popular, do you switch? Now here, I probably should have said ventilators because that's what's happening with pandemic. How long would it take you to change your production from one to another? Okay. And will the supplies, your factors of production, land, labor, and capital you use for one transfer to the production of the other? So when we're measuring the elasticity for supply, we have to think again in terms of criteria. Now, when I looked it up, just as a refresher, there are more than three, but let's try to keep this simple, at least for this level of economics. So the three criteria we will be thinking about will be the ease to switch. How hard is it going to be to go from producing one thing to the next thing? Time period for the switch. How long will it take to go from one to the other? And the last part is factor mobility, which sounds very technical, but isn't that hard. Will the factor of production of one, the things that you use to make your first product, could they be used in the second product? Or are you going to have to get all new factors of production? Really, that makes a lot of sense to me. So let's again use our diagnostic tool of the table. Here are the three criteria. This time I'm thinking in terms of the producers, okay? So I've got a farmer, and I'm putting an asterisk here because I'm thinking like a farmer that does corn, and this time it's going to switch to oranges, okay? Not corn to soybeans because that's Iowa, right? But if all of a sudden Iowa with global warming went from corn to oranges, okay? Factory, where you make something, factory owner, and a teacher. Now, let's start with ease to switch. How hard would it be to go from one production to another, one service to another? Now, for a farmer, it could be hard because I'm going to tell you once you plant your crops, actually switch over to something else that would involve trees, it would be very difficult. More training, you definitely would have to need some help. As for the factory, it might be tough to do this too because you're going to have to retool everything. So it is going to take a lot of work to do that switch over. And as a teacher, it could be easy because a lot of our service is dealing with more of the delivery than it is actually making a product. And so in this case, when we talk about ease to switch, if it's hard, that means your supply is inelastic. If it's easy, you're elastic. Now, when it comes to time period of the switchover, like how long would it take you to switch over? For a farmer to switch over from, let's say, the wheat to the oranges, it's going to take a long time. You can't all of a sudden switch because there's growing seasons and you have to wait till the first crop gets done before you can do the next crop. As a factory owner, you might not take that long. Now, in the light of the pandemic, the auto workers have been switching over so fast, it's been unbelievable. But normally to retool an entire factory takes a while. Maybe not as long as a growing season, but definitely takes a while. And as for a teacher, we are pretty flexible. We tend to move, with the waves. We may have to do some education, but we're definitely not going to need as much of the physical stuff, so it's not quite as long. Factor mobility, okay? Now, when we talk about this part, it's does the factors of production for the one transfer over? Now, if they do transfer over, that's elastic. If they don't very well, that's inelastic. Now, for a farmer, transferring one to the other, it probably could mostly. Okay, so it's kind of in that middle part. As a factory worker, not a lot. Depends, of course, but we're going to say not a lot. If you decide to go from SUVs to ventilators, there's going to be a big change. And you're going to have to bring in definitely other things. No more tires, for example. Now, as a teacher, I could probably still use the whiteboard and the Elmo and my computer. And so factor mobility is really, really very much so. Okay. Now we're going to go horizontally. As a farmer, it's hard to switch. So that means you're pretty inelastic. It takes a long time. So that means you're pretty inelastic. But the factor of mobility it could be possible. And so 2 out of 3 means a farmer tends to be inelastic. as a factory owner, it's hard to switch over, okay? It takes about a medium amount, and depending on what it is, your factors are probably not going to all go over. So factory transferring over from, let's say, a consumer side to a wartime, it could be very inelastic. It could take a while. That could actually explain why it took America a long time to get into World War II. Again, it's U.S. history reference, but totally applicable. Now, as for a teacher, it's easy for us to switch over. It takes a short amount of time because we're super flexible, and our factors of production will follow us. All three of those are very elastic pieces. So teachers tend to be more elastic in our supply, a little bit more easy to fill in for a lot of other parts and pieces. Instead of teaching in a public school, we could be a trainer for a corporation. We could be working in a college. You could do lots of things. Now, for the chart for the supply elasticity, it's very similar to that of demand in the fact that the flatter the curve, the more elastic it is. And the more rigid or up and down the curve is, the more inelastic it is. Because if it's up and down mostly, that means you can't change a lot. If it's more horizontal, that means that there's a lot of possibility for change. Now here's the big thing, the takeaway. It's important, but why? Let me give you a number, 190 million. Now that's huge. Well, what does it mean? This is the number of businesses in the entire world. And the top 15 richest countries have 180 million of them. This means that producers and consumers have got a lot to think about. Consumers have a lot of choices, especially with the internet, and producers, they have a lot of competition. For a consumer, it might look like this. Okay, so you start off on the left looking like we need a new dishwasher. There is quite the journey. There's so many different choices, and by the end, you're so confused. Who knows, right? Now, on the other side, and this sounds a bit more like, my grandfather, he'd walk into a store, buy it, and leave. This is a little bit more. Now, I might ask you, if you're in class, which of these two is elastic and which is inelastic? Now, hopefully, the idea that there are so many other choices and you're bouncing around a lot, you should see that first example as being elastic. The second one and done is what my grandfather would say. That's very inelastic. That you're going to take it no matter what, it doesn't matter whatever it is, and to you, there's no other substitutes. Okay. Now, for a producer, it might look a little bit like this. These days, the auto workers have been asked by the president to switch over to making ventilators. And so they've done that. And they've done it very well. And so they've proven themselves to be very elastic producers, that they were able to meet the need very quickly. And because it definitely was an emergency. Now, COVID-19 has also hit the farmers. And I don't know if you guys know this or not, but because of the impact with the packing companies or the packing factories, that a lot of these farmers have got to kill their livestock because there aren't enough people to process them. And so they're really struggling. When you've committed to raising livestock, it's hard to turn around because you've put so much of your life into the one that you don't have enough to put it into another. And that means that you're really inelastic. Now, hopefully this makes sense. Again, there's lots to dive into, lots of videos out there. I've actually put together 2 bit.lys for elasticity for demand, elasticity for supply. Check them out if you need to. Otherwise, it's been a lot of fun going through this. And if you have any questions, contact me at jross2@cbcsd.org. Take care and see you soon.